what up, y'all? We've been gone a long freaking time, and you thought we were maybe gone forever. But you're wrong, because I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bart.
And this is still Turn Bar time, and we have been here a long time. So, ladies and gentlemen, just so you know, this is season 5, or as the Germans say, season 5, and episode 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If we're doing German. I don't know why I'm doing German today.
So
really cool concept for what we were talking about today. It actually came from I think it was an Instagram video that I sent you, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was just basically talking about this because one of the things that is unique in that, and I don't know if anybody else has this thought. I know that you and I have talked about this multiple times about like where words come from, etymology and things like that. But really, like, where does language come from as a whole? And there was a very unique experience that actually happened in Nicaragua, in which who studied it? Etymologists probably are the people who studied this. Is that, or what would you go with?
I would say the person who gets credit for observing it is she's a linguist from MIT at the time. She teaches somewhere different now, but
right.
She was from MIT at the time.
Okay, and so basically, it's our first time, like, as I guess being able in the modern day to study and watch language develop in real time. So, Bark, I'm gonna turn it over to you to dial us in here.
Yeah, so Nicaragua, like a country in Latin America, right? So as Mexico gets skinnier as its journey to Panama, as the umbilical cord touches North America to South America, I love it. Paint you a picture, right?
Yeah,
in Nicaragua, once upon a time, there was a revolution led by the Sandinistas, and so the Sandinistas started. They took things over. They were a little bit more socialist than America would have liked. You could say it was controversial, but yeah.
I hope you got that joke.
That's for you, Scott.
Yeah.
But one of the things that happened during this time period is they realized that there were people, deaf people in Nicaragua, who essentially like didn't have language. And the numbers I've been looking at, that the majority of people who are deaf, 90 to 95% of them are born to a hearing family, and only 5%, 5 to 10% are born to a family with another deaf family member. Okay. And so the problem becomes, how do you teach them language? And so like in Nicaragua, up until this happens, it starts in the 70s, and then it really kind of takes off in the 1980s. Up until that point, there had been no unified sign language taught in Nicaragua, which seems mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Because you go back as far as like the 1500s, and Spanish conquistadors were saying that Amerindian populations in the Caribbean had some version of like sign language that they used to communicate with each other, like for trade, and then eventually like projected that onto the Spaniards. And then like the Spanish, who was it? It was Ponce de Leon, somebody, but like there was a monk in the 1600s who developed a rudimentary like sign language for monks that took a vow of silence.
Okay.
So, and like you don't get the modern genesis of like sign languages like as a taught language until what, like the 1700s, I think it is. I think it's in France.
Yes.
And so like it starts in France, and then a guy named, last name Gallaudet, like I guess poaches one of the star pupils from France, and brings them over to America, Laurent Clerc, and sets up Gallaudet University for people who are deaf in America, and from FSL, French Sign Language, creates ASL.
American Sign Language.
And yeah, American Sign Language, which is different than French Sign Language. And so one of the interesting things is that when they put all of these children together who had never been taught any formalized version of sign language, they all have what they called in Nicaragua mimicas, which are essentially like pantomimes. Like they just said they're pantomiming, like, the same way that like we're teachers, we talk with our hands all the time.
Yeah.
And they were just saying, oh, that's all it is. It's not really language. And what they noticed that over time, and they tried to teach them
So
fingerspelling to Spanish, right?
So basically what they were trying to do originally was that they would focus on like actual spoken Spanish, but with lip reading. So being able to identify words through like, and I feel like a lot of people who are deaf, again, I don't speak for the deaf community, that is a skill that gets picked up on. And just and then limited finger spelling with like a simple alphabet. So, it's like when people like come up and they're like, I can know sign language like A, B, C. It's like, okay, well, there's actual signs for words. Like you don't have to spell out the alphabet. There are some things you spell when you don't know the sign for them. And so that was their first like kind of attempt, and it did not work very well.
Yeah, so the kids at this school like were actually like really against like what was being forced on them, and it was, of all places, I found a clip. There was a guy talking on Joe Rogan, which is an odd place for me to be. But he was saying that, like, for a lot of deaf communities, like, that's what happens. Like, people try and eliminate, like, signs and push them towards a more, like, a speaker's culture.
Yeah.
And so, like, these kids, what they did is they took all of these, like, pidgin, which is, like, a term for, like, rudimentary, right, like, language. Yeah. And they started, like, sharing home signs, and then eventually like their home signs developed, like they started developing like syntax and like rules, and then like if you signed closer to your body or away from your body, that had relevance. And so like they had no connection to any other modern sign language at the time. And so like by the time, her name's Judy Kegel, went down there, and so like she starts observing. And it's really interesting because I was reading this article from The Independent, and they were saying that the way that she verbalized, because she's a hearing person who just studies, like she specializes in like, right, deaf cultures and language. And she was saying that she approached it like they would in Star Trek with the prime directive of like her job, like Jane Goodall with like, right, the gorillas, right? You don't want to interact with them. You want to just observe what they're doing. And so like she tried not to use like ASL because like there'd been this trend that anytime that somebody was found using like it's kind of a village sign system, or like, right, something that wasn't a formalized, recognized sign language, that you would just come in and put in kind of like the equivalent of the colonizer sign language, which is either like, ASL, FSL, or like British Sign Language. And so like she tried really hard to just like observe and try and figure out how they're, like, you got to watch this genesis of language, which actually, like, I looked at it in this independent article, like apparently there's more examples than you would think. So this article from the Independent was written in 2012. And there was a lady named Connie DeVos who was studying people in Bali. So there's these small communities where they have a recessive trait that causes a higher frequency of deafness. So like it's the likelihood of a baby being born hard of hearing or like deaf is 10, I'm trying to think, is it 100 times? Because like the normal prevalence would be 4 kids, and like I lost the other number. So it's like it's either 10, like normally in like a population of 3,000 people, there should be 4 people who are deaf. Okay. And like they have 40 in this community in Bali. So like there's some sort of genetic trait that's passed down that, because like it's in these really small localities, but they create these sign languages. So there's one, she's studying one in Bali. There was a lady, Lena Hou, and Kate, oh shoot, I didn't write that clear enough. I apologize. I think it's Kate Mesh. One of them's from UC Santa Barbara, the other one's from University of Haifa. But they were studying, there's Chitino sign language down in Oaxaca. Oh, okay. That apparently is a sign, like a sign language that only exists in Oaxaca. There's also a whistling language where people communicate in Oaxaca across the jungle and just by whistling.
Interesting.
because apparently the whistles carry better there. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's not
No,
topic
no,
for
no.
another
Yeah.
time. And then like the last one that it had in the article was the Miyakuba or the Ehihimi Oshima like sign language, which comes from like this really small island in Japan.
Okay.
Again, that doesn't have a lot of connection with larger communities. People generally stay there. Oh crap! And then there was this girl Rubia Erjin, who was at she was at a university and was at like a conference, and they were talking about like language and ASL, and she goes, oh well, like my where I come from in Turkey, like the people in my village like have like everybody in my village signs, because there's a lot of people who like there's 3 really small villages up in the central Taurus mountains who like again have this recessive trait, so there's a higher prevalence of people who can't hear, and so they've developed in the entire community like at varying degrees, not everybody's like fully fluent, but like has their own like village signs. It's now recognized as Central Taurus Sign Language.
Okay.
But I mean, like, so like there's more of these kind of like niche communities than we I think realized when this happened. But it's a great opportunity, and it's led to a lot of debate about do we show up, and when they don't have words to convey certain concepts, do we step in with like whatever sign language we know? So like from the United States, like ASL, do we teach them ASL to fill in the gaps? And so like a lot of these researchers have taken that prime directive approach. And there's actually their professor Felicia Ackerman from Brown University actually wrote a pretty scathing like article in 1999 about the study of Nicaraguan sign language, saying that you're not helping these people, like you're limiting, you're pigeoning them into a hole where like they won't be able to communicate in a larger like deaf international community. And some of the evidence that so like when they were down in Oaxaca, like the 2 researchers would slip up. One of them is hearing, the other one is not. So they would sign to each other in ASL. And then they said that the people of in Oaxaca like never, they would only simply like they would make the signs when they were saying, oh, you made this gesture, but they never adopted any of the language.
Never became a thing.
And so it's just really interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like when we say, like when we're speaking Spanish and we're trying to figure out a word, right? And we'd say like "como se dice," and then you try and get it so they could get the word and stuff like that. But it doesn't mean like I'm going to say it all the time. It's just the word.
Yeah, and it's we think about, and I mean, we both work in schools or in districts where we actually teach ASL as a foreign language. So, you know, shout out to Miss Doncaster and Mr. Graff, our respective buildings. You know, and it's one of those things that I can't remember. I wish I would have grabbed it. Our Chinese teacher posted it on social media a while back, saying that the percentage of parents, like in the modern time, if of those 90% of families who can hear that have a child who can't, the percentage of parents that are signing with their kid is rising.
Good.
Like that are learning to sign, which mind boggles me. Like, why would you have a kid and then not try and find a way to communicate with them? Like my kids speak English and we struggle to communicate.
Yeah.
Like, and it's the same language. Parenting, man. I just can't imagine trying to parent a child that I can't communicate with.
Yeah, and not even have like an attempt to communicate. I mean, like you said, like the original thing would be like, I need you to point to whatever you need, you know, and that's going to be our thing. But man, just the lack of communication would be insane. Like it would just be so tough. It was interesting because where was I at? Was I at Ace Hardware? We were getting pizza last night. Actually, this is what happened. We were getting pizza last night, or Monday night, I should say. And there was there was a student who was deaf, and he was going into Ace Hardware with his dad. It looked like appeared right, and he was signing at him like excitedly, and you saw the dad like holding this like what looked like his sister, and he's like trying to sign back, but he's like holding the sister like on his shoulders. But it was just like even in our community, right? Like I think in Quincy, I think I've only had one student, and I had her for a little bit, and then I think she transferred to your class. That was hearing impaired or deaf, and you just like you said, you don't see that often. 3,000 people, you got 4 people total, so. But just interesting to see that. So, but yeah, communication would be that'd be tough.
Yeah, and so like I was kind of thinking about it, and I was looking, and it's interesting because I wrote there was a Nat Geo article that said that there's 72 million deaf people or hard of hearing people, like hearing impaired. And then I wondered, like, because I just got hearing aids like a year ago, like, am I hearing impaired? And so like people that I work with at my new building say they're like, well, you make a lot of eye contact when you talk. You don't tend to like talk to people and wander. And it makes me wonder because like I gradually lost hearing, like it's hereditary. It's not like I, joined a rock and roll band one summer and just like did all the damage. Blazing Stallions. But
Blazing Stallions.
San Dimas high school football rules.
Yep.
But one said they recognize, Nat Geo said there's 300 sign languages across the world. Another publication, it looks like Ethnologue, said there's only 150.
Okay.
So like I'm just wondering if there's different, like
interpretations of like what makes it a language. Like
right. Like what quantifies or what doesn't.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is they were saying like even though like even some of the languages, so like you would think that Nicaragua speaks Spanish, it would be similar to Spanish Sign Language, and it's not.
No.
But even Mexican Sign Language is different than Spanish Sign Language.
Would you say so? Sorry, I'm going to backtrack to the Nicaragua thing that we have, because the resistance to Spanish is one of the big things. Like the kids did not want to learn lip reading; they didn't want to learn that Spanish. Do you think that played a factor into it being so different from, like, I guess signing what we'd consider Spanish, or like, do you think it's just the evolution of what they created?
It's probably closer to like problems that I would imagine. So like as like Europeans interacted with Native Americans that didn't have like a written language, they didn't see a need. There's no necessity for a written language in their culture.
Right.
So like they resist it because they don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you're making me learn all of these like so, and again, like you're trying to teach like almost like 2 to 3 times what you need to teach.
Yeah.
So it's like it'd be like trying to teach somebody English and Spanish when they don't know like any language. And
right.
the other struggle that they discovered studying the people in Nicaragua was that the older people struggled more because it goes back to we're both teachers, we understand that proximal zone of like
development,
like learning, right?
Yeah.
And so like if you don't get any language development before you're 7, like the window starts to close and it's much more difficult. And so like I actually watched an interview where Judy Kegel was with another woman who was using Nicaraguan Sign Language, and then she was like, but she was only giving like, she asked about like, hey, how did your dad die? And the lady was like 3, just use the sign for 3. Mm-hmm. And she goes, okay, well her dad was shot 3 times, but she only just said 3. And she goes, the only reason I know that is because we've had previous conversations.
Got it.
But like she just said 3. You know what I mean? So it's like they have a harder time, just like if you were trying to learn a new language at 40, right? Versus at 4. But like it was actually the younger kids that became more fluent and developed the rules like more so, because again, it goes back to like you don't, those synapses right in your brain aren't aligned, and so like you haven't been taught like how to think. Yeah. And so the kids just made it work the way that it seemed like it needed to work better. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just really interesting, this idea of like, it used to be this idea that we can't introduce any signs from like another, you know, existing language to watch it grow. And I mean, it's still like growing itself. Yeah. Like these other, the one in Bali is called, what is it? It's like
I have it right here.
Katakolak.
Yep.
Um, but like they were talking about like, well, they don't have like a number. It was either them or the one in Japan. They're like they don't have a number system for like greater than like 20 or 30.
Okay.
And so like one of them was like asking a family member, they're like, how would you sign like I have 223 bottles of juice? And
Yeah.
the person's response was, why would you have that many bottles of juice? You know what I mean? So like it was
Oh
really
yeah.
interesting because for them, like in those localities, like we don't have a word for that because we don't do that.
Well, and see, that's the same thing. Like, because my mind jumps to like when you talk about money, right? Like, oh, I owe you $1,000, and it's like if this person doesn't know, if there's no need for to say 1,000 million, whatever, then they're not going to have a word for it.
Yeah, and I mean it's really interesting to me because I mean like, coaching, I think every sport has its own language in a way.
I would agree with
And then
that.
like, and so like people there's only so many different like formations in football or different things you can do in football, but everybody has their own words for it. And like I've hired some new guys and they're like defensively like you speak your own language.
Yeah.
And we do. And but it makes sense to us. It doesn't make sense to anybody else, but that's the whole point of
Right.
creating this little like niche language just for this one thing. And it's just really interesting to me that like even in the modern day, like we think that everything's connected. We think everybody has the internet.
Right. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like there's still like a dozen places around the world where these really, really small populations have been able to keep like a local in like a local sign language. I don't want to use that like I don't know, like an indigenous language. Um and it's one of those things like, like how do we protect them from going away?
Right.
But in a lot of them, like they're saying like, well, there's still people being born that need to use it.
Yeah.
And as long as they live here, like we're going to teach them that
Like,
language and that culture. So I mean, it was kind of mind-boggling to think about. Like it's the to watch a language evolve, but then I think it's also disingenuous to say that languages always interact with other languages.
yeah, because they don't necessarily.
You know what I mean? Like English is the giant gumball that just keeps grabbing more and more words from other like we're going to take tsunami.
Yeah.
That's a word in our lexicon now.
Yeah.
um and it like makes me think about too like it's almost really interesting that sign language allows us to communicate. Like scientists have taught what was her name, Penny Patterson taught Coco,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
gorilla, like how to sign.
Yeah.
And then Coco taught
Our
other
child.
gorillas in the same way that in a lot of rudimentary like sign language, like people who learn how to sign and learn how to communicate will teach their other kids how to communicate in the same way that like in any language, right? Like you mimic what you see when you're a very young impressionable like child. And I don't know, I just think it's really really neat. Like I think I know that we cover it in our ASL class at our long like kids really struggle with the idea of tactile ASL or tactile sign language, where you feel the signs
Yeah.
because you're not only deaf, but you're also blind,
Right.
right? And so, like, kids are like, I can't fathom how to do that. And it's like, yeah, because you rely so much on these two senses
Yep.
to experience the world. But if you don't have those two facets, you will find another way.
Right.
And I just feel like we're doing a better job of making those people seen. So like Gallaudet, just there was the Sound of Silence commercial where they
Yep.
they appealed to the NCAA to get like a little video screen so they could call audibles and communicate with their players because they're at a disadvantage.
Right.
And there's always been like the Washington School for the Deaf within the last 2 decades has gone to the playoffs.
Yeah.
And like they struggled with like, we they don't you can't clap or say hike because that doesn't work for them. So they have to have a different system. And then I watched a video about Gallaudet University, and they were talking about how they're changing their campus to be more deaf friendly. And they were saying simple things as like the width of a hallway. Because when you and I walk down a hallway, we can stand right next to each other and communicate with very little space between us. But if we're two people who are deaf, like we need a lot more space so we can sign.
Fine. Yeah.
The way they design their classrooms is not the traditional like professor at the front and then like just everybody sits here in the gallery. They make U's so that everybody can see each other, because when they communicate, you have to be able to see that person.
Yeah.
You can't look at,
You can't look at the back of
I
their
can't be
head.
behind you and know
Yeah,
what you're
yeah.
saying.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? And then they talked about like they use a lot more ramps. Because think about the difficulty of trying to walk up or downstairs
Sign.
while you're trying to talk
Yeah.
with your hands.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. It's just well, again, like being a hearing person, I would never think of that. Like that wouldn't cross my mind of being able to do that. And like at most it's when somebody talks and they talk like this, right? The volume changes because of just the sound waves are going away from you. But to think that you'd really have to look at someone the entire time a conversation is going on, that would change a lot. So
Yeah. I mean, I find it's an interesting little caveat to like look at like to be able to look at kind of like the genesis of a language, or look at these like how these have been created and how they've been kept alive. But I'm also excited because I think the prevalence, like a lot more cities are using sign language interpreters. Like when we get to like big sporting events, like
yep.
those people are people who like sign concerts.
Mm-hmm.
Those people have got to be like on 50 pounds of caffeine with how energetic they are and how they convey. And that was one of the other interesting things is like depending on what sign language it is. So like in the Balinese version, like they to symbolize like something is done, they go, even though you can't hear the pa, but like that they see that. So like your mouth, what your mouth does is part of the sign language. Where in ASL, you traditionally talk while you sign, but your mouth isn't part of the sign.
Right.
So in some of these other cultures, like it's full body usage.
Full body language, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's I found that really interesting as well. Kind of like learning about this and like thinking about it like outside of the box, and like they were saying that like British Sign Language is different than Australian Sign Language, which is different than like ASL, despite the fact that they all speak.
They're all based in the same root in the same language, yeah.
Yeah. So
interesting. I love it. So hope you learned a little something, right? Really cool. Like again, language development, something super interesting. Again, and then getting more advancement out into the deaf and hard of hearing community, right? Thinking about some of those other things. So we got a really, really good topic for you if you're a youngin'. If you're an older person, it's probably not going to interest you that very much. But we're going to talk about a bill that was signed, I believe, today. Am I right on that? Today?
Yeah. I believe Joe signed it today.
Yes. So we're going to talk about good old TalkTick. What I mean by that is TikTok and its potential ban. Yes, that's right. Do a quick dance. Quick dance. Quick dance. Quick dance. Quick dance.
I'm not on TikTok. Are you on TikTok, Turner?
I am not on TikTok.
We are safe.
I'm an adult, Barker, so I watch TikToks on Instagram Reels. So,
like a normal person, Jill Copenhaver.
Yep. So, but anyway, it is very interesting. It's one of those things. Jill Copenhaver really wants us to have a TikTok, by the way, just in case you have wondering. She really wants us to have a TikTok.
She tried to get me on TikTok before I left Quincy, and I was like, no, ma'am.
Yep. Nope. She was like, no, she said that you and I should have a TikTok. Like, Turnbark Time should be TikToked. And I was like, maybe if we taught the same school again, we would probably swing a TikTok eventually. But Instagram is our friend right now. So, but yeah, we're going to talk about the ban. We're going to talk about potential like legal challenges that it'll face. We will talk about potential outcomes and just kind of an overall look into it. There's some really interesting Supreme Court cases too that we might jump into because they're just fascinating stuff going right now. Anyway, before we do our normal sign out, Barker, your question is, are the Seahawks going to A, select a player with the 16th overall pick, trade up, or trade down tomorrow night?
So does trade up move back
Sorry, trade up would be going through picks 15 to 1.
Or move back.
And trade down would be moving through pick 16 to 32. Or select a player.
I'll say they select a player.
Ooh. Okay.
And I say that bonus content.
Ooh, give it to me.
Shout out to what's his name? Is it Max Brown? Former college quarterback at Pitt.
Okay.
I say that because he says that the number of underclassmen in this year's draft is very small.
Oh. Okay.
So the quality
of athlete
is in the front. So it's front loaded. So we might just sit where we're at. I think we're going to sit where we're at, and we're going to pick somebody.
What are you going to go? What you don't have to pick the player. I won't make you do that unless you're feeling good about it, but you got to pick the position. And by position, you do not need to be specific. It could be O-line, D-line, linebacker, quarterback, running back, all that it is.
I know everybody expects us to pick the quarterback of the future, but we just got rid of both of our safeties, so
you going DB?
I'm saying DB because defense wins championships.
Okay. My pick, we're going to trade down and select I'm going to say trade down, and I'm going to say select I'm going to go defensive lineman. Actually, no. Yeah, offensive lineman. We trade down in offensive lineman. So we want a second round picked back up, or at least another third round pick. So, but all right, we'll find out. One of my favorite times of the year, guys. If you haven't known, just watch that draft. If you don't care, I'm sorry. That's okay. Find something you do care about and just really enjoy it tomorrow. But Barker, anything else?
Seahawks might drop new threads. I don't know. We'll see.
God, those old school uniforms. I want old school helmets again. That's what I want. I want the old school helmet.
I feel like we're like Denver. We just want to go back to the throwbacks.
Yep. And just that be the permanent uniform. All right. If there's nothing else, Barker, it's been a lot of fun. And I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
And we have been here a long, long time. Have a good night, everybody.
Be safe.
And just by golly, you be well.